Welcome in, Draft Nicks, to another edition of Draft Nation. I'm Chris Mack. Good to have you with us because you know Draft Nation is the best place to go for absolutely anything you need in regards to your favorite teams and sports and how some of those teams are being built out and built up. And that goes for all four major professional sports and then some. I know past the trade deadline in the NFL, but already some teams are thinking about the future because they're not going to the playoffs. Quarterbacks are being released. GMs are being fired, and that's just in New York. You've got Major League Baseball into the meat of the hot stove off season pretty soon anyway, I'm sure. Sounds like Juan Soto going to start to visit with some different teams this week or listen to proposals. And then, of course, you've got the NHL and NBA more than a month into their seasons and some big games already being played in the NBA as far as the NBA Emirates Cup goes. And, of course, college basketball. It's feast week. So lots to talk about with hoops. We thought we'd get someone who knows his stuff. Stephen Gertz of Draft Nation also covers the Pitt Panthers and a lot of NBA hoops. Good to have you, Stephen. How you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Chris.
Absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time. And let's talk NBA. And one of the stories that won't go away from the first month of the season anyway is the disaster that the Sixers have been. So can they get the nose up on this season, to use an aviation analogy here, or have they already slammed into the side of the mountain? And I guess, what does it mean for a Jared McCain, for example, who seems to be one of the few sparks of life on that roster right now, if they don't get back on track soon?
Well, it's not great for them sitting at 3-13, Chris. I mean, they're the second worst team in the East, which is already not a very good conference, only just a little, game ahead of the Wizards, more or less. But are they able to right the ship? Well, they probably can, because there's only 4 teams with winning records in the East, right? So they're not completely out of it the way that you would be at this position if you were in the Western Conference. I think the big thing is, you look at Embiid's only played 4 games. Paul George only played 8. Even Tyrese Maxey, who's probably like their third guy or a 2A guy, he's only played in 10 of the games as well. So Jared McCain has certainly been that bright spot. I mean, if the rookie of the year were to be voted on today, I think he'd be rookie of the year at this point, just, averaging almost 17 points a game on some really good shooting splits. So positive notes for him. I think obviously as a rookie deal, he's going to continue to be there. But for the Sixers in general, they have to be healthy. Their next stretch of games isn't too easy either. They're playing some pretty solid teams. They have, kind of back-to-backs with Orlando coming up. I think they have the Rockets here on Wednesday. So if they don't have all their guys out there, they easily can continue to lose multiple games here over the course of the next month and a half.
I wanted to talk about another rookie who's made a name, especially in the last couple of weeks out west. But you brought up the Magic, since they sit out there on the Sixers schedule. How much noise can they make this year? Because the absence of Paolo Banchero, they seem to be not just surviving it, but continuing to thrive despite his absence. It sounds like he's feeling positive about maybe getting back sooner rather than later from that torn oblique, even talking about maybe Christmas. Just how good can the Magic be this year in that weak Eastern Conference?
Well, they're one of the teams with a positive record here, so I mean they can certainly make some noise. I mean, I think with Banchero, I think you hope that he's going to get back prior to Christmas. I know he's optimistic. We haven't heard any setbacks. Jalen Suggs, he has to come back from just like a recent strain that he's had, injury, lower body injury, but it's really been Franz Wagner. I mean, when you look at the last 5 straight games, including the game that Banchero goes out, they've won 8 of their last 9. Franz Wagner's led them in scoring in 8 of those 9. I mean, he's averaging, if we're being generous here, 24, 6, and 6. I think this guy is definitely going to be pushing for an all-star position. I mean, he's really risen to the occasion. And then they've had some other contributions as well. But, I mean, they certainly can make some noise. Are they going to make some noise against Boston? I think that's probably everyone's question in the East. But they've had some success against the Cavs in the playoffs, right? So, that's a team that definitely could be eyeing at least the second round with a healthy Banchero. I think for them, too, outside shooting, which has been an issue for them in the past, it's continued to be an issue for them a little bit this year. If they can find that, which I think they're hoping with Contavious Caldwell-Pope coming over from Denver with that championship experience as a 3-and-D type of guy. If he can add that along to the really good top flight defense that Jalen Suggs gives you, I think they have a really good chance to make some noise in the East.
I mentioned a rookie out west who, especially in the last couple of weeks, has made some noise, Dalton Knecht. I think a lot of people, despite the brawny noise surrounding the Lakers, this year, understood that Connect was the rookie that really had a chance to make an impact for the Lakers. And he has, especially when he's gotten an opportunity to play significant minutes, get into the starting lineup, and be a volume shooter, which for him is, we're talking north of a dozen field goal attempts in a game. Seems to be a sweet spot for him. Didn't start against Denver over the weekend, and the Lakers didn't look all that great. Not to just put it on Connect's presence or not in the lineup, but should he be in the starting lineup every night for the Lakers? And do you think he is better as a volume shooter?
I think it depends on the matchup. I mean, when you look at what JJ Redick's been, I think he's been very, matchup specific. I don't think he's afraid to shake things up. D'Angelo Russell had been in that starting lineup for a long time, was struggling, and then he started going with Connect. I mean, the Lakers are 3-2 in the games that he's played. They probably should have beat the Magic. We just talked about Franz Wagner. He hit the game winner in their recent contest, but they've been very successful, and he has to have some volume, but he's been extremely efficient on that. He's shown this month, he's shooting over 40% on threes, over, I think, 46-ish% from the field in general. So it's certainly a guy that when you look at LeBron's career, even though it seems like his prime is lasting forever, his teams have been really great when he's surrounded by really, really good shooters. And Connect is like that. He's shown the ability, while he's at Tennessee, as a movement shooter. It could be a spot-up shooter. He can make some plays off the bounce there and still get shots off. So, should he be in there? I think that you get the most out of LeBron, and you might be able to play off double teams that Anthony Davis draws. But I know they really kind of like to have that bigger front court too, that includes Rui Hachimura when he's available as well. But it's kind of that fifth spot, right? Because Austin Reeves is going to be the fourth guy. So they've been successful. I think LeBron would maybe prefer it that way. I mean, he had some really good things to say about them getting him, I think, late in the draft, 16 or 17, wherever he went, and all those other teams messed up. So I think by the end of the season, you should see him probably starting, I think, half the games. But they've been okay.
Also out west, it's interesting what they've put together around Wemby already in San Antonio, right? Stephon Castle, who's a great two-way player, getting to learn from maybe one of the guys who in the peak of his powers was like that, and Chris Paul. It's a very interesting, I guess, collection of talent that they've put together personnel-wise. Harrison Barnes has played pretty well early on. How deep do you think they can go, and how much of it is just dependent on Wemby and how healthy he can stay, and how much he can provide on the defensive end as well as the offensive end when he's hot?
Obviously, recently, he had a massive eruption there for points-wise, setting career highs. I mean, if he gets hot from the outside, he's nigh unstoppable. But I think I did see something that, he's taken almost as many just 2-pointers as 3-pointers this year, which is a little strange for a guy that's 7'3", right, and that athletic and dominant around the rim. But I think, the Spurs continue to add, like you mentioned, really good veteran pieces. Harrison Barnes, Chris Paul, guys to learn under. Paul is one of the best pick and roll point guards to ever play the game. So I'm sure that, that really helps him. Stephon Castle, he would probably be a top 5 to 6 rookie if the rookie of the year was voted on today. They have other interesting pieces as well. Devin Vassell, the Florida State guard, he's kind of one of those Spurs-like player combo guards that can do a lot of things, likes to defend. They have a lot of guys like that. I mean, at 9-8, I don't know. The West is such a bloodbath. It's hard to say. They're going to have to get through what I think is the play-in. I don't think they'll probably end up finishing as a top 6. So, you look at the teams that are staring down the play-in. The Timberwolves and the Kings are on the outside looking in right now, but I figure at some point they'll be in that. But Dallas is in that situation. The Lakers could slide that situation. So can they beat teams like that in a play-in situation that have been there, have a little bit more vets with more championship experience? That'll be waiting to be seen. I think Wemby would have to be an absolute monster in those games, which he has shown. But I think just making the play-in this year would be an accomplishment for them.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes how fast we get ahead of ourselves. I remember looking at the Rockets at times last year and thinking, okay, but sometimes we do. We get out ahead of ourselves, and now, you mentioned them earlier. The Rockets are one of those teams near the top in the West that is actually they're actually starting to put things together, and sometimes we get maybe a year or half year ahead of ourselves when we look at some of these young teams. Speaking of which, in the East, again, the East can be messy, especially the play-in spots. We're used to the usual suspects, right? Oh, it's going to be the Bulls and the Hawks every year, and at least 2 of those play-in spots. But are the Pistons legit, at least as a play-in candidate?
Cade Cunningham's legit. I mean,
Yeah.
that's for sure. I mean, that guy, as long as he's healthy, he went down, I think at the end of the game against Charlotte that ended up going to overtime, missed the last game. So they ended up losing both those games, 7-11. But again, the East is pretty wide open. I mean, they're going to have a chance to be in that play-in. I think with Cade, he could be better than any player on another team in a play-in scenario in the East. And so for sure, they need to get Jalen Duren back on track. I mean, this is a guy that averaged like a double-double in almost like 80% of his games. Now he's likely to foul out in the first 5-6 minutes, although Isaiah Stewart's come in and played well. But they have some good vets, added Tobias Harris to the mix. I think he's a good fit along next to kind of more of their like paint-oriented centers like Duren, Jalen Ivey. I think, or the Jaden Ivey. I think they need him to step up. He did in their most recent loss, but he's an interesting piece as well. So yeah, I think they could definitely make some noise in the East in the play-in scenario, but mostly because I think Cade's probably an all-star this year.
Yeah, a team in a similar spot in the standings that I can't get a handle on whether they're actually building it out the right way because they've got talent like Brandon Miller and. But then sometimes it turns into what I like to call a LaMelo Ball vanity project. The Hornets. Like I said, I've had a hard time getting a handle on what they may actually be this year.
Well, I mean, if you're a gambler and you bet like LaMelo to get 4 threes, 8 assists, and 25 points, you probably clear that all the time because he takes like 16 threes a game. So, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head though, Chris. Like the Hornets, a lot of times, like they have LaMelo whose numbers look like an all-star, but I mean, are they really going anywhere? I was on a podcast with, Emmett and Joe in the beginning of the season before it started and said, like, Nick Richards, Mark Williams, those guys need to step up. They've not been healthy. They just lost Grant Williams for the entire season. I mean, that is a big blow. Brandon Miller looks like he has definitely taken a step forward, but in kind of Melo coming back and Miller stepping up, Miles Bridges is diminished a little bit. Last year he was pretty good for, mid 20s, 7-7 most nights. And now he doesn't seem to be there. So, and then Saloon, their rookie that they took at like the 6th pick. I know this wasn't a great draft, but that guy, if you redrafted right now, would probably not go in the lottery. So I think they don't really have as many intriguing young pieces. Guys like Seth Curry they acquired haven't played the roles that maybe they would on a Pistons team that we mentioned, these other younger teams that have kind of incorporated vets in that way. So to me, that this is a team that's kind of stuck where they've been.
Yeah, it's something to see. Like I said, just the they can't seem to find an identity, I think, is the thing, other than LaMelo. Like that's, and it's with a talent like Brandon Miller available, like you said, you would think that would lend itself to a little more cohesion on offense, which I haven't seen it yet anyway. Speaking of young teams trying to find their way, you mentioned earlier they're at the bottom of the Eastern Conference standings. The Wizards they're the Wizards. They're, I don't know what else you can say, but here's the thing. They have young talent on that team, 4 first-round picks in the last 2 years. And if they would commit to that young talent, getting the minutes necessary to really develop from being on the floor, I get the sense that they could accelerate this rebuild that they're in the middle of, but they continue to go back to veterans from time to time to eat some of those minutes. And the one of the very bright spots in a very young NBA season has been what Bub Carrington has been able to do for them. Wasn't really on the radar for being selected where he was in the draft. The Wizards jumped on him, and he's made the most of the opportunity when he's gotten that opportunity. But like I said, they continue to lean back on veterans from time to time. This is a long way of asking, is Washington going to screw up Bub Carrington, Steven?
Well, they could end up screwing up some of those rookies, not just him, but Keontae George and also or Keyshawn George and also Sarr. They just, I saw something recently, when they were in that run when you talk about before some of these veterans came back. Kuzma has been out. Malcolm Brogdon just came back. Yeah. Those were guys holding their assignment to less than their, at that point, seasonal average field goal percentage. So those guys were committed to defense, and that's something like Washington just doesn't do. Like they just, like when Kuzma and Poole are in there, they're just not going to defend anybody. Yeah, I mean, they're not going anywhere. I mean, so like Carrington comes out of the starting lineup for Brogdon. I understand Malcolm Brogdon's been a really good player, been very productive for a long time, but to your point, this is your future. Carrington is your future. He's one of the few rookies that had earned playing 30 minutes. I think he's the only rookie in the league. Maybe McCain's pushing against that now. That's playing 30 minutes a game. He's averaging like 10, 5, and 5 and reasonable shooting splits with a low turnover. I don't know why he didn't stay in the starting lineup. I get Poole and Brogdon are getting paid, but Brogdon's probably a solid piece. Poole is just, I mean, he's just out there trying to get 20 points a game and hopefully see a cute lady sitting on the front, the sidelines there. That's been his MO, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It's, when you get to a point where you've got youngsters who need to develop, you need to find the time for them to develop by actually, on the job training, as it were. And when they're sitting on the bench, they can't get that. A couple other teams I just wanted to touch on in the East, which you mentioned has been particularly ugly early on, and we'll probably end up with a similar picture in that 7-10 spot for the play-in games. Indiana, I had questions about whether they did enough during the offseason. I understand they were happy, unexpected Eastern Conference Finals run, but now they're left looking like a team that maybe didn't go out and address anything during the offseason. I understand Siakam was the priority this past offseason, keeping him around, but it kind of left you wondering, well, to use an NFL analogy, the Cowboys, who said they were going to, do everything they could this offseason, they didn't really do anything. The Pacers didn't really state, hey, we're going to go out and do whatever we can, but you would suspect a team with a young talent like Halliburton coming of age and making that run, like I mentioned last spring, would try to add and capitalize on that opportunity. Instead, here they sit right there in that 7-10 range right now, granted, early in the season.
Yeah, I think with Indiana, I don't know. I mean, maybe Halliburton needs to be studied for how long it does take you to come back from a hamstring injury, because he has just not been that same guy. I mean, you look at it, and we talked a little bit about mentioned the Commissioner's Cup here, the Emirates Cup, whatever it is this year, and going into that championship game last year, I mean, he was an all-star. I mean, he was arguably one of the best, if not the best point guard in the league in that small sample leading up to that. And now, this is a guy that struggles to get, 10 and 10 on a night. The shooting's not there. And it starts with him. I mean, they really kind of designed the offense around him. So I think they looked at it and thought, well, we're bringing back Siakam. They planned ahead and they re-signed Andrew Nebhard, who's been a big piece. He was really good in the playoffs when Halliburton missed games. He's been out. Benedict Mathurin's been coming in and out. So they've had a little bit of injury there for some key pieces. But I think the main thing was they thought, hey, we're good with a Miles Turner, Siakam, Halliburton core with some young pieces around it. And I think just honestly, Halliburton's been just not good. And I think that's been the main piece.
What have you seen from the Knicks in trying to fold in Cat and trying to, they came in high on everybody's list, I think, on most people's list, as a team that could challenge the Celtics in the East. Instead, the story has been the Cavs. Is it just a matter of get to the playoffs in the top 4 in the East and then see where it goes from there? Or is there maybe something missing early on for the Knicks, who I think are only 2 games above 500 as we're sitting here this morning?
Yeah, I mean, 9-7, and they've recently surged back. I mean, but if you were to end the MVP voting today, Cat's probably in the top 3. I mean, he's just off to a torrid start. It seems like they kind of won that trade there with the Wolves when they're sitting at 8-8 in the West. The piece that they're missing, because you mentioned that, is Mitchell Robinson. He hasn't been on the floor for them, and you think they're 13 in points against as the Knicks. They're not a great defensive team. We know Anunoby is, we know Bridges can be, but in that center, in that interior, Cat's never been that. And they really need Mitchell Robinson. He's been good against guys like Embiid. He's due back here soon. And he's still eyeing up that early January timetable. So I think, see what they are post-January with him back in the rotation. They have Miles McBride. They have some intriguing young guys coming off the bench. And obviously we know what Brunson is. And mentioned all the other guys. But, to me, Cat has been probably, and they have that recent, upcoming game here against Denver. We'll see, because Jokic would probably be my other pick for MVP right at this point. He's been real. I mean, he's been awesome. But I think it's defensively, they've taken a step back, which is kind of strange under, a Thibodeau team. But I think Robinson's a big piece of that.
Out west, we mentioned the Rockets already. The Thunder are a little farther down the timeline than the Rockets, obviously. But they've looked very solid this year. Is this the year they kind of get over that proverbial hump in the postseason? Again, I know we're only 6 weeks, not even 5-6 weeks into the regular season, but they look like they're putting it all together early on here.
Yeah, I mean, Chet Holmgren's gonna have to come back and be really good again. I mean, he's still out 8 to 10 weeks. I mean, that could be that's the deciding one to me. Going before he went down, and again, we are 20% into the season, but you mentioned only 6 to 8 weeks in. They were probably the best defensive team against centers over that time. And we talked about Wemby earlier. You look at some of the other bigs. You look at a Jokic. There's a lot of really talented bigs. Even Ivan Zubek for the surprising Clippers is having a great year. they've not been that since he's been out, right? So he has to come back and he has to play at kind of that second banana to Shea, and the really talented Jalen Williams. I know they have two Jalen Williams, but the one that, really does a lot in the starting lineup. I mean, he has to be well. And Caruso's been a nice piece for them. I think that was kind of one of their things they looked at, like, hey, can we get a defensive oriented perimeter guard that's got some experience? Hartenstein is they're hoping he can shore up that frontline defense a little bit in kind of the absence of Chet. Obviously, that's, again, we just talked about the Knicks. That's one of the things the Knicks are missing this year with not having Robinson available either. So I think they can go a little further. I mean, obviously tied for first in the West. So, they're going to be in the mix.
One last team I wanted to ask you about before we pivot to some prospects in college ball. Should Suns fans be worried? 6 out of their last 7, I think they've lost 5 in a row, maybe. And again, early in the season, but this is a team it feels like constantly is dealing with chemistry issues. And I don't know if that's the thing that maybe is being worked out, if that's what's led to this recent skid, but just your early thoughts on the Suns.
Well, I mean, KD went out. I mean, and that's kind of like the summation, I think, of this season is just injuries. When you look at, KD went out, and I think they immediately lost, they're like 1-6, like 1-8 or something like that without him. But they were 8-1 with him. So, I mean, they were probably the best team in the West going into that, and then have just lost most of those games. Booker's had a calf strain as well. So, that's a team that we knew was already top heavy. With Durant, Beal, and Booker, and so when you lose some of those guys, and I think Nurkic has not been very good at all this year, that they're going to really struggle. So I think when he comes back and he's eyeing up that tomorrow game, which is very interesting because in that group that he's in there with the Thunder and the Lakers for the NBA Cup, that's a very big game for the Lakers to maybe go 3-0. That's a big game for the Suns to kind of stay relevant for a wild card in there, maybe going 2-1. So if he returns tomorrow, we'll see. But I think they were off to a great start. I mean, this season has just been injury after injury. Some of these teams are like starting 5 rotation players.
Yeah. So it is feast week. I mentioned that off the top, Steven, in college hoops. Just through the first half dozen games or so, for most programs and NBA prospects, what have you seen that you think is noteworthy, good or bad?
For prospects coming in, I mean, I think if you take a look at BYU's Igor Demon, I mean, that's a guy that's going to be in that jumbo playmaker. He didn't come in here with like the Bailey hype, not the Cooper Flag hype, Harper hype, any of those guys. But this is somebody who's kind of blazed the trail to get himself probably into the top 5 if he continues to put up the numbers and with the efficiency that he has. You look at how popular jumbo playmakers are in the NBA. You start with guys like Scotty Barnes, Josh Giddey, Anthony Black. I think all of their weaknesses are the ability to shoot, despite the fact they have elite size. And I think Denman's choosing like, hey, I can shoot the ball. And if he continues to shoot it well, you could see him going into a loaded draft somewhere and, maybe even as high as 3.
I was going to say, this draft, it looks to be, I don't recall one like this in recent memory, but if you just look at any average ranking of the 2025 draft prospects and go through maybe the top 15 names, there's a good chance you're going to see 1 or 2 international players, maybe a sophomore or 2 in there, but mostly all freshmen in this class. And so, again, I don't recall a group of prospects like this, Steven. You may remember better than I do, but it's something to watch all of these freshmen come in, the influx of freshman talent into college basketball, have this year, and then the majority of them, 95% of them, are going to poof onto the NBA.
Yeah, I don't know if it's been this many because, you mentioned the international. I mean, that's obviously been the flavor, recently. I mean, you saw that specifically in this past draft, but, to have this many talented freshmen, I think, Duke has a couple, the 2 Rutgers kids, Baylor, just mentioned Denver. I mean, there's a couple teams that have been pretty good the last couple of years that have just really stocked up on talent. I mean, even North Carolina, who's been very good with keeping around some of their, star guys, Baycott forever, RJ Davis. I know Love left for Arizona, but they have 2 freshmen in there as well that, could probably go in that late lottery as well. So it's just a really good, talented high school class. They are obviously going to have to go to college for the 1 year. And a lot of them didn't end up taking that G League route, which is, if you looked at some of the guys that came in the draft last year did.
Steven, great stuff. Love all the information and all the insight. And as things progress through the holidays and into the new year, we'll definitely have to check back and see how how you're assessing not just where these NBA teams full of young rosters are at, but also where some of these collegiate prospects are at. We appreciate it as always. Thanks for going on the clock with us here on Draft Nation.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Chris.
Absolutely.